How's it going, everybody? It's your boy Mike from Seattle, the return of the two-time defending champion of not receiving stimulus checks because I make too much money. Duly elected sheriff of the internet, though I do not have international reciprocity on my credentials, so I can't speak for laws up in Canada. All right, I'm going to leave that up to Mr. Thoughtslime. What we're going to be doing today is reacting and responding to Thoughtslime's follow-up video on landlords.
Hello, it's me, thoughtslime. Sometimes I make YouTube videos. And
this was asked in the comment section of my video a couple of times, and he didn't respond to my video. I don't know why. I mean, I had a staggering, like 1,500 views. It's one of my most viewed videos. I am a garbage YouTuber, but 1,500 views, I guess I can understand why he would have responded to some other guy's channel who has thousands of subscribers and 10,000 views on that video. Whatever. I won't take it personally. That being said, people have asked for me to follow up with a response video to his follow-up video. I know it's a little convoluted, but that's what we're going to be getting into. So initially, I recorded my response video the same way as last time. A little picture of me, a little picture of him. I'm watching the video, but his new one is 40 minutes long. And even trying to go as quickly as I could, my response video was an hour and a half. I'm not going to make you sit through an hour and a half. So what I'm going to do instead is skip to some of the points that I think weren't covered in the first video, and then I'm going to respond and react to those points in this video. If you think I didn't cover something or I evaded a topic, leave it down in the comments below and I will respond to you happily, or potentially even make your own response video for you. So leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel, even though the majority of people who watched my last video were Thoughtslime followers who just came to the comment section to tell me that I'm an idiot, parasitic loser. That being said, I think that the term landlord is a little bit too specific. I would prefer something a little more gender non-binary. So if you could refer to me from here on out as Parasite, that would be preferred. Anyways, guys, let's go ahead and get into it.
the thing about farmers is you're paying them for their labor. They grew the food, they harvest the food, they distribute the food. It wouldn't be fair for them to do all of that without compensation, within a system where they require compensation to meet their needs. Landlords might perform labor incidentally. They might do repairs or maintenance on a unit, they might fill out paperwork, but that's not what you're paying them for. You're paying them because they own your home. Like, if you moved into an apartment and there was never any need for repairs and there was no paperwork, you'd still have to pay rent.
Okay, so reacting to that right there, he's like, hey, even if you moved in and they never had to do any repairs, you're still paying them rent to have the thing they own. So real quick, as mentioned in the last video, the way that any business operates is that included in the sale price of whatever product they sell, be that cupcakes at a bakery or cars off of a car dealership, included in the price of the product you pay, a certain percentage is set aside to pay for the cost of labor, a certain percentage is set aside to pay for the maintenance on the building, a certain percentage is set aside to cover the insurance costs for running a business. The actual dollar amount you spend on a Big Mac, $5, it does not cost you $5 to make that sandwich, but you have to factor in the costs of everything else that goes into running a business. That's what the management's job is, and the general manager or the owner of the company, or in my case, the landlord, has to factor in. When I charge you your monthly rent, say it's $1,000, if you just go ahead and Google what the average return on investment for a rental property is, most people are dealing with what's called an 8 cap, 8%. They're getting an 8% return. So out of all of the money that you're bringing to them, really only 8% of that is profit. There's many other businesses that operate on higher profit margins. There are some that operate on lower profit margins. This is not price gouging you, the tenant. It is a well-known fact that real estate and rental properties run on a relatively small margin. 8% of the profit is actually what the landlord sees. Out of your $1,000 a month rent, some of that is going to pay for the mortgage, some of that is going to pay for the taxes on the property, some of that is going to pay for the insurance on the property, the cost to insure the property. And yes, even if you, the tenant, has to have renter's insurance, I, the landlord, also have to have insurance on the property. My mortgage broker is going to require it from me. I also have to factor in the cost of saving a certain percentage for vacancies. When the unit goes vacant, I have to pay to advertise it. I have to pay somebody to show it. There's costs in there that I have to account for. Lastly, you moved into a property and the entire term of your lease, you were there 12 months, 2 years, 5 years, no repairs were needed. Well, good for you. That means you have a good landlord who is probably providing you a high quality product that isn't falling apart. That's what you want, because that's the opposite of of a slumlord. That being said, how old is the building you live in right now? You, the person watching this, are you living in a building that's 20 years old, 40 years old, 100 years old? I lived in houses when I was a kid that were part of Section 8 and we rented, and they were made in the 1890s. There were some serious problems with those buildings. My duplex right here was built in 1997. It's over 20 plus years old. Now, when the roof needed to be redone back in 2015, everyone who rented in this duplex from 1997 to 2015, which is 18 years, not a single one of them had to sit there and pay for the repair or the complete renewal of this roof. But what the landlord did was every month you set aside a little bit of money and a little bit of money and a little bit of money. So when you get hit with that large cost of remodeling a kitchen, remodeling a bathroom, changing out the roof, which here in Washington is usually around 30 grand, you don't have to eat that as the landlord in the shorts all at one time, because over the last 20 years, I set a little bit aside and set a little bit aside and budgeted for it.
When you pay rent, you hand over your money to a landlord, and then they do nothing but collect it. That's why it's called passive income. The only role the landlord plays in this transaction is to collect money and hand their tenant back nothing, not a thing, nothing.
Okay, so he dogs on passive income. They collect your rent and do nothing. That's why it's called passive income. So this is a meme. It's an internet meme between landlords and in landlord groups about how this is the most active income that I've ever made while making passive income. It is not just as easy as sitting back on the beach with a couple of mimosas in your hand while you watch hot bikini Instagram models run by and frolic in the sand and you get to get rich. That's not how it works, okay? Usually, for most people that didn't start out with a lot of money, which again, here's an interesting statistic for you. 80% of all millionaires inherited $0. That is a study conducted on over 10,000 millionaires by Chris Hogan, who wrote the book, The Everyday Millionaire. They conducted the largest study of millionaires ever conducted. 80% of them inherited $0. So the notion that money is inherited and generational wealth, no, I'm sorry. Yes, obviously the Rothschilds, the Waltons, some of these mega rich families do perpetuate their wealth to their offspring. But the large majority of people who become millionaires are first generation millionaires, and that's how they made their money, by actually working hard. Like me, and though I'm not quite a millionaire yet, I should hit that mark in the next year or two here. Just reiterating on my earlier point, it is not that the landlord is doing nothing. You may not see the work that they have to do because you're not a part of them listing it to get the next tenant in there. You're also not a part of them paying the property taxes and managing the mortgage. You may see them coming out and mowing the lawn or having a service come out and take care of the yard and things like that, or maybe they're doing it themselves, or maybe they wrote it in the lease that you have to do it. Depends on where you're at. I've been places before where it was my responsibility. I've been places before where it was the owner's responsibility. And they may also be saving money aside for those massive repairs. And again, if you live in a property and you don't have any massive repairs or any repair, that's a good thing. That means you have a good property and you're taking care of it and it's being taken care of. Nobody wants stuff to break down. Well, you know what? I'm paying this guy all this money. Gosh, I wish my water heater would just go out so I could see him put my money to good use. No! It means it's already gone out before. He's replacing them in a timely fashion so that he doesn't have those issues, and you get to come in and have no concerns about it. Secondly, the benefit to you of being a tenant is that you don't have to make those giant payments. The roof is what you would pay to rent probably in the Washington area. In Seattle, where I'm at, where my unit rents for $2,000 per side, it would be an entire year and a half worth of renting, one-time expense just to fix the roof. You don't have to come up with that. The landlord does. Now, he doesn't have to do it every year. Hopefully, he's only replacing his roof once every 30 years. But when you start to factor in water heaters and kitchen remodels and new carpet and new paint and new trim and the yard service and all the other things that you have to do to maintain a property and keep it up, it's very costly and it is time consuming. Now, it's not as time consuming as a 9-to-5 job. You can manage it on the go. That's one of the benefits to it. It's not that I want to own property so that, again, I can just sit back on a beach and do nothing. It's so that I have the freedom to manage it from wherever. I can go move to Florida, which is one of my goals, and buy a house on the beach, which is one of my goals. And I can manage via the phone and internet the people who work for me to maintain my properties. And I can direct all of that from a remote location, which is something that we've all become accustomed to doing thanks to the coronavirus. Many people can now work remotely. It's more advantageous and it makes more sense. Dogging on landlords for their ability to manage things from afar is a dumb argument in my opinion. I think that shows that they have good management skills and they're doing a good job of mitigating problems and ameliorating bad situations. That's good. Slumlords are garbage human beings who should see criminal prosecution and should have fines imposed on them. If you are not providing a good property for your tenants, that means you're a terrible person, because you shouldn't be allowed to let people live in a destitute situation where they have broken appliances and a nasty, disgusting home. So if we want to argue about slumlords and garbage landlords, which I'll be the first to admit there's terrible landlords out there, just like there's terrible tenants out there, I'll stand side by side with my comrade thoughtslime and sing the praises of good landlords and denounce the actions of bad ones.
If it weren't profitable, it wouldn't even make sense that it existed. Like, what would a landlord even be if they weren't making a profit? But with or without the profit motive, there would still be farmers, there would still be plumbers, there would still be cobblers.
Okay, with or without the profit motive, there would still be farmers. Yeah, but they wouldn't have the incentive to plant crops to feed millions of people. They would plant enough for probably themselves, maybe their immediate family, and maybe their immediate community. The benefit of capitalism is that it has created an ability for people to specialize in one specific domain or skill set, instead of how it used to be 100 years where you had to know how to tailor your own clothes, you had to know how to build your own house, you had to know how to grow your own food, you had to know how to bake your own bread, you had to know how to educate your own children. All of these different things that everyone had to be able to do all of it because of capitalism, because of the way our economy has worked. We have been able to specialize into specific skill sets, which has allowed for the advancement and proliferation of our species to the point where we can have someone like Elon Musk create an electric car, which everyone said was nearly impossible, strap it to a rocket that people thought he wouldn't be able to make for cheaper than what NASA can make it, and it was a reusable rocket that you can land, which was also supposed to be impossible. So he strapped his car to a rocket, fired it into space, and the thing is circling the planet. Why? Because he has the benefit of not having to waste his brain, his incredible intellect, on things like tailoring his own clothes, baking his own bread, educating his own children, and he can focus 100% of that creative power into just making cool, badass rockets and launching them into space with electric cars on it. Good for Elon, good for us. I can specialize in what I did before I was a cop. I did construction, but not just general construction. I specialized in granite countertops for kitchens and bathrooms, and that was my specialty. I was extremely good and extremely efficient at that one small niche product for remodeling kitchens and bathrooms. And someone else would come in and do the cabinets, and someone else would come in and do the flooring, and someone else would come in and do the recessed lighting to make the kitchen look brighter. And because of the specializations afforded to you via capitalism and via our economy, we can have people provide something and only do that one thing and do it very well.
Matt talks a lot about the landlord-tenant relationship being win-win in his video. He doesn't really explain why it's a win for the tenant. Presumably, I guess, because they get a place to live or a chill landlord, I guess.
To me, like we talk about on my YouTube channel all the time, win-win relationships. I personally believe that we have win-win relationships with a lot of our tenants. Now, I personally believe that we have win-win relationships with a lot of our tenants.
No, he did not admit that he was exploiting some of them. You were the one who naturally assumed that the non-winning person in that relationship was immediately the tenant. You didn't even take a second to think to consider that maybe the non-winning person in that not win-win relationship was the landlord. As a landlord, when my tenant stops paying, I still am obligated to repair the property. If he stops paying me and he didn't pay for 6 months in a row and I'm not allowed to evict him because of the coronavirus, when he calls and says his air conditioner is broken in the middle of summer, I'm still obligated to go out and fix it, even though I'm not getting paid. Now, yes, once again, there are slumlords who will not hold up to their obligations. I don't agree with that person. That person is dishonest. That person should face the consequences. A good landlord, even though it sucks to not be being paid by your tenant, when something is broken, you still have to repair it. It's a lose situation for me and a win situation for the tenant. But again, a win-win situation with your tenants. And he said he didn't explain how it's a win-win situation. Well, there's lots of benefits to renting versus owning. But allow me to elaborate on just a couple. I rented between the ages of 18 and 28. At 28, I bought my duplex, my first rental property. Between the ages of 18 and 28, I couldn't afford to buy a house. And the reason was I didn't make very much money. I was an unskilled laborer at that time. It took me years of working and developing myself before I made enough money to actually be able to afford a house. But the benefits that I had with renting was that I had far more mobility than I did if I had owned a home. If I had bought a house in, let's say, 2006, right before the bubble popped, at that time I would have only been 16 years old, so I really wasn't buying houses, but let's just say I had bought a house in 2006. Immediately after, when the economy tanks and my house got cut in half in its value, if I had sold, I would have sold at an extreme loss and forever had a giant debt over my head that I would have had to pay back or file for bankruptcy. So essentially, I would have been trapped in my house, unable to sell until the value of that home recovered, which in some places took all the way until 2020 with the new pandemic and the new increase in housing prices. You are trapped in your house unless you can sell it for at least break even or a profit. So the mobility you get as a tenant and as an individual by renting instead of owning is that I can just, when my lease is up, I can leave. Or I can break my lease early. Sure, there may be some penalties. Usually those are lined out in the lease ahead of time and you can read them. Most of the time the penalty is, well, if you break your lease early, there's either a one-time pay-to-quit fee or you have to keep paying until the landlord gets it rented to someone new, which is exactly what I did when I bought this place. I had a year-long lease that I was only 5 months into, but I was trying to buy a property and I found this one and I let the guy know, hey, look, I'm buying a new property. I'm going to be moving into it. I'm going to go ahead and exercise the clause in the lease that says I'll keep paying you until you get it re-rented. And I paid for 6 weeks of rent that I wasn't living there. And then I moved into this new property after he got it re-rented to someone else. That is a fair deal that did not harm me. I had the mobility to go wherever I wanted. Another benefit for a tenant that I explained earlier, you're not responsible for repairs at any point. Again, once again, if I had bought a house at the age of 16, if I had bought a house and owned a house when the water heater breaks, when the roof needs repair, all of those costs are on me. Those unplanned expenses that my small little tiny baby salary couldn't afford to cover would fall to me. Instead, if I'm renting someplace, an apartment in my case when I was that age, if there is an expense for the building, the managers of that building have hopefully been doing their best to manage it in an intelligent way and set aside money every month for repairs like a new roof on an apartment complex, something that I wouldn't be able to afford. So the benefit for me, once again, is that I'm not going to have unplanned expenses. The average American can't even afford a one-time expense of $400 that's unplanned in a month. And 60% of Americans don't even have $1,000 in their bank account. How could you possibly expect these people to pay for a $30,000 roof remodel? You can't. That would financially bankrupt them and ruin their lives probably for 5 to 7 years. Or if they're renting, it's on me, the landlord, to fix that type of stuff, which is a huge benefit to you as you are building your skills and your income in your early years between 18 and in my case 28, 10 years. Now, if my roof goes out, it sucks, but I can still afford it. I can make it work and then I can move forward from there. So those are just 2 quick examples of how it is a benefit to be a tenant. There are certain benefits. Yes, you're not building equity in the property, but I wouldn't say your money is going to waste. You have freedom, flexibility, and you don't have to be on the hook for large payments when repairs happen. So there are some benefits and some things you give up. But on the other side, I get to build equity, but I also have to eat it in the shorts when stuff goes to crap.
Rentership, which requires that you pay 30 to 40% of your paycheck and get no return on that investment, makes it that much harder to save up for the down payment, making it that much more difficult to escape the cycle of debt.
Okay, hold on. So it's that much more difficult to save up for your down payment to buy a house. You're right. It is hard to save up for the down payment to buy a house. However, millions and millions of Americans become first-time home buyers every single year. Millions of people manage to do this. And again, it's not wealth just being passed down. As I mentioned earlier, 80% of all millionaires statistically are first generation millionaires and inherited $0. Not a little bit, zero, inherited nothing. So when you say it's very hard to save up for a down payment, yes it is. But you know what I would tell you? I would say that you need to focus on shifting your priorities. And this is the bitter pill that you don't want to swallow. That with everything in life, it comes down to a certain degree of personal accountability and personal responsibility. Now, of course, there are some people through true misfortune, whether that be medical issues that they had or they got struck by a car and are now incapable of working. There are some people out there who really do get taken advantage of or have something bad happen to them. And you know what? We have safety nets to help them. I grew up on Section 8 housing, okay? There are safety nets in place, but if you are an able-bodied adult who's capable of working, yes, you can save for a down payment. You may not be able to buy a house in Manhattan, Seattle, Chicago, or LA because it's very expensive in those extremely desirable real estate markets where the average price of a house in Seattle, where I'm from, is $800,000. But you can buy a house in the Midwest for $50,000 or $100,000. And all of a sudden the whole, well, my grandparents bought this house back in the 60s for 40 grand and now it's worth 800 grand. That's not fair. Yep, they got in on this market before it had any of the amenities that you wanted, before it had the population growth that you now like to be around. It didn't have the popular downtown city center area that exists now. And because all those things have come to service the suburbs that they initially moved into, it's now a much more desirable neighborhood. But you have the opportunity to move out to your own suburb that isn't as desirable as you would like it to be, but it's significantly more affordable. And I can hear the naysayers, well, sure, just move. Oh, just move. For all of human history, people have been migrating all across this planet from one place to the next. Yes, if I can't afford to live in downtown Seattle and need to move 40 miles outside of the city so I can save 50% on the average home price, drops from $800,000 to $400,000, yes, you should move. If you can't afford the $400,000 price range, go another 50 miles outside of that and see what happens to the price then. Go to a different state. Go to a different market. Well, I want to be near my family. I got to stay with my kids. Okay, fair enough. That's the beauty of the economy and the world that we live in. You have that freedom of choice. If you would rather prioritize proximity to family and proximity to amenities and closeness to the downtown area, you're going to sacrifice some things, and the things you're going to sacrifice is you're not going to be able to afford to buy your own home. You're probably only going to be able to rent. But because of landlords buying this ridiculously overpriced property and owning it, they can actually make it available to you at a cheaper price than if you had to save up and buy it yourself. So once again, pat on the back for landlords for actually providing some housing that wouldn't have been there in the first place. And secondly, if you decide to not make those choices, you can always sacrifice something else. You may have to move away from your family. You may have to go and live in an area that's not quite as desirable, doesn't have the sports teams and doesn't have the concert venues, but you can find affordable housing somewhere else and live there. Whatever choice you make is up to you, and I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, but it's really dumb, in my opinion, to just complain that, well, I want to get a cheap house right in the most desirable area. Well, so does everybody. And because everyone wants to live there, that's what drives the price up. It's not the landlord sitting there saying, all right, I'm just going to charge triple the value of my property or triple the value of what fair market rent is. No, it's you get 10,000 applicants trying to rent out your property. You raise the price to whatever the market value is. The market value is determined by what people will pay for it. I can't just sit here with my $2,000 unit over there and put it on Craigslist for $6 grand. Nobody's going to buy it. No one will apply. Even if I lower it to $5 grand or $4 grand or $3,000, no one is going to try to live there because they'll be like, it's way too expensive. I can get a similar unit in the same area down the street, around the corner, 2-3 blocks away for way cheaper. Why would I buy from this guy? I have to lower my prices all the way down to what the market has determined this area is valued at. And then I can list my property, and then I will get applicants. And in my opinion, if you're a smart landlord, I actually go just a little bit below the average cost for a unit in this area, because that way, if I'm $50 to $100 cheaper than everyone else, everyone wants to live here, and I get more applicants, and I can have my pick of the litter, looking for that best, most qualified person. A little pro tip right there. But again, not to get too far off topic, yes, you can save a down payment. I did it. Check what your priorities are, okay? How many people are you friends with on Facebook? Do you see posting, man, I'm really on tough times, money is tight, things are difficult, I'm getting divorced, the kids need braces, and then 2 days later, check out my new tattoo. Or a selfie of them at Starbucks with their $6 coffee. Or that weekend, it's them at the club with their boys or their girls, and you know they're spending money there. Yes, maybe you have to make sacrifices. I have been to about 3 bars in my entire life, and at none of them did I ever have a drink, because I don't drink. And for the people who do drink, not that I'm against it, if you want to drink, by all means, go ahead. But when I look at the prices of what you pay for alcohol, I'm just baffled by it. Holy, it hit me over the head with a baseball bat. If I want to feel loopy, it's going to save me a lot of money. I don't understand why people spend money on the things they do. I shop at Walmart. All my clothes come from Walmart. My groceries come from Walmart. I drive a 30-year-old Geo Metro and a 21-year-old pickup truck. I don't have nice cars. I live in a duplex. I could afford to live in a $500,000 house. I can make the payments on it, but no, I chose to live in a smaller duplex. That's B-level quality instead of something nice. I could pay to have a lawn care guy come out and mow my yard, but I do it myself. What are your priorities? How badly do you want to save for that down payment? If you actually look in your heart of hearts, are you really doing everything you can to make that happen? Or are you really mad that you want to live the life you want to live and enjoy the things you enjoy and do the activities you want to do, and they cost money, and unfortunately you prioritize those things, or fortunately you prioritize those things and you don't have as much additional income set aside to save to invest in buying yourself a house or invest in real estate? You make your choices and I make mine. I don't judge you for going out and getting the tattoos and partying, so I don't understand why you have to then dog on me for choosing to do something different and invest my money intelligently, and then tell me, well, you got rich by luck and you didn't actually work or earn any of that, and you should be taxed at a higher rate, and really the fact that you bought that house, you stole it from someone else, and you're responsible for their death if they die. That seems pretty messed up if you ask me.
My point is that your relationship with your individual landlord is voluntary only in the sense that you chose that place to rent. The fact that you had to rent at all is usually a financial necessity imposed on you.
The fact that you had to rent at all is a financial necessity imposed on you at birth by your parents, okay? Not by the landlord. You exist, you have to be housed. It's your responsibility to figure out how to house yourself. As a fully functioning, capable adult, it's your responsibility to take care of yourself. Just because you exist, again, this is delving into the realm of politics, in my opinion, I don't think that just because you breathe and just because you exist, it is the government's responsibility to take care of you, pay for your schooling, pay for your four-year education, pay for your food, pay for your housing, pay for whatever it is that you want. It's your job to have a stake in your own success. And what that looks like to me is it's your job to figure out how to provide for yourself. And as I mentioned earlier, if you are disabled, if you are incapable, if you actually meet certain criteria for safety nets that are already established and in place, then you will get that assistance from the government. And I would be more than happy to have a conversation where we talk about expanding the safety nets to include different groups of people that may not currently be protected or included in those groups, but to suggest that all people, 100% of the population deserves, as Andrew Yang says, a universal basic income, or as thoughtslime says in his videos, they should have their houses assigned to them by the government determined on the basis of their need. No, work for what you want. Work for what you will get. It's okay to have a stake in your own success. You don't get to just exist and therefore get something. And lastly, the last point I'll make on that, the government isn't creating something. The government doesn't get to just give you money. The only way the government can provide you with anything is if they have first taken it from someone else. If they want to provide you monetary aid in the form of food stamps or Section 8 housing, the first thing the government has to do is tax someone else, take that money, and then redistribute it. Now, maybe you're all for redistribution of wealth. I understand that's a large political argument we don't have time for, but the government isn't giving you anything. The government is forcing someone else to give you some of their surplus. That's what's happening. And I am for, as I mentioned earlier, safety net programs like food stamps and like Section 8, which I grew up on. But to sit here and pretend that there is no waste, fraud, or abuse happening in any of these safety net programs is a lie. There's many people who are rightly on those programs who need the help from the government and need the assistance and need the benefits. And there are also people who take advantage of it. And if you are sitting here telling me that there's no one who has any waste, fraud, or abuse, you're lying to yourself. Likewise, if you're sitting here saying, well, everyone should be able to take care of themselves and no one needs assistance, that is stupid. There are people who need help and we should want to help them. There are people who take advantage of it and we should want to discourage that type of behavior, find those people and get them out of the system. That is a very reasonable opinion to have, in my opinion.
If you're dying of thirst in the middle of the desert, and I have a canteen that I'm willing to share if you agree to give me $1,000 a liter, the guy buying the water is technically doing this voluntarily. I'm not forcing him to buy my water. He could hold out for an oasis or someone else to come along with water. And I mean, technically, I'm helping him out. Without me in my canteen, he'd be dead. But I'm still taking advantage of his desperate circumstances to get him to agree to a deal that he wouldn't agree to otherwise. Now say there were 3 people with canteens, or a dozen, or several thousand, each charging different amounts, and the dehydrated guy chose to buy water from me because my water was the cheapest. That's still not voluntary, except on an extremely literal technicality. It is exploitation.
Okay, this is like one of the greatest arguments for capitalism that there is. And I'm sure he'll disagree with me, but I think he just made it without even recognizing it. Okay, so guy's wandering through the desert and he's gonna die of thirst, of dehydration. And somebody shows up and says, well, I'll give you a liter of water for $1,000. Well, of course he's gonna have to take it because otherwise he's gonna die. And then he goes on to say, but what happens if there's 1,000 people all selling water for all these different prices? Well, fantastic. That's what capitalism does, is thousands of people are seeking to compete and provide you the best product at the cheapest or fairest price so that dire situations like your eventual death because of dehydration no longer exist. You can now wander out into the desert and you don't have to worry about about dying of thirst and dehydration because there's so many people competing for your business that you will get the best price and you will get the product you need when you need it, where you need it, so that you don't have to run the risk of dying of thirst in the desert. Likewise, there would be people out there saying, oh, you know what, you also probably need some nice sunscreen, and you're probably going to get hungry when you're out there, and people will compete to provide you with everything. This is the beauty of capitalism, is that it gives you the opportunity to have choice. I would like to drink that rich, ritzy, bougie Voss or Fiji water. Maybe like me, you grew up so poor that your hot dog never had a hot dog bun. It had a piece of bread folded in half. Or you never had bottled water once in your life because you drank it straight from the tap or the garden hose. And I'm sure thoughtslime would have a very quirky joke in here about how the lead from the hose may be what is contributing to my political opinions, but I'm going to beat you to the punch on that one, my guy.
Okay, that aside, let's say you are a small business person, you go out, you invest in this business, you work hard, and you win the lottery. Your business does really well, and you start pulling in millions. You bootstrap yourself up to success.
Okay, so there's my problem with that guy right from the beginning, his philosophy on business. Let's say you pull together your resources for a small business and you win the lottery. It's not about winning the lottery. It's about, as he said, taking a calculated risk and doing your research and being educated in the market and working hard to provide a service and then being nimble enough with your business to figure out who you should provide to and how you should adjust and how you should move through the market to actually sell your product. It's not about winning the lottery. You don't just 10 people open up businesses and one of them gets lucky. Obviously, sometimes luck can play a part in your success, but the majority of businesses that are successful and are continually successful long-term over time are because they're not winning the lottery. They're working extremely hard, taking calculated risks, monitoring everything they do, and then trying to do it better, and usually prioritizing the customer first.
Therefore, according to the logic of capitalists, you are entitled to all of that money that you wrench from your employers, and you're entitled to all of that exploitation that you are committing. Is this really the way that we want to run our society?
Okay, let's say he's right. The only way that I made any money is because I exploited these businesses and I exploited these employees and I took advantage of them. Completely disagree with the premise at all. But then he says, is this really how we want to run society? Well, yes, I think it is, because look at the actual benefits of it.
So here's an example. The UN Millennial, one of the UN Millennial goals was to reduce the rate of absolute poverty in the world by 50% between 2000 and 2015. And they defined that as $1.90 a day. Pretty low, you know, but you have to start somewhere. We hit that at 2012, 3 years ahead of schedule. And you might be cynical about that and say, well, it's kind of an arbitrary number, but the curves are exactly the same at $3.80 a day and $7.60 a day. Not as many people have hit that, but the rate of increase towards that is the same. The bloody UN thinks that we'll be out of poverty defined by $1.90 a day by the year 2030. It's unparalleled. And so the rich may be getting richer, but the poor are getting richer too. And that's not the, look, I'll leave it at that because I'm out of time. But I'll leave it with this. The poor are not getting poorer under capitalism. The poor are getting richer under capitalism by a large margin. And I'll leave you with one statistic, which is that now in Africa, the child mortality rate in Africa now is the same as the child mortality rate was in Europe in 1952. And so that's happened within the span of one lifetime. And so if you're for the poor, if you're actually concerned that the poorest people in the world rise above their starvation levels, then all the evidence suggests that the best way to do that is to implement something approximating a free market economy. And so, thank you very much.
Capitalism is successful. It is the worst form of economics, other than all of the other ones. Just like Winston Churchill said about types of government, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest. And capitalism is the worst form of economics except for all of the rest. It has many faults, there's problems, there's corruption, there's greed, there's everything in it that you can say negative exists. And all of those things exist in every other form of economics that you can try or that has been tried. Capitalism, for all of its faults, has many benefits to it and has created more prosperity for people at every level than any other form of government exists. You have the privilege of floundering in the desert and having 10,000 different water manufacturers trying to sell you their water at the cheapest rate so that you don't die of thirst. You're welcome. Show a little gratitude.
But despite the poor choice of example, Matt is correct to say that almost all economists agree that rent control is a bad thing. What's left out of this little fact is that almost all economists are parasites that believe whatever neoliberal bullshit the Chicago school tells them to. Turns out that when you actually look at the data, rent control reduces the amount of rental stock because landlords sell rental units more.
So I'm actually glad that he decides to go ahead and explain that yes, the large majority of economists agree rent control is bad, and that when rent control is practiced, it ends up limiting the number of available rental units because landlords sell their properties. Again, it's a great argument for why rent control is a terrible idea. If you say to a landlord, okay, like the law they passed in California a year or two ago, okay, you're no longer allowed to increase the rent by whatever amount you want. If you have been renting your property for $1,000 a month and your tenant moves out, you can't just increase it $300 a month. You're only allowed to increase it 5% at maximum every year. A couple things that happen right away. No longer will a landlord ever not increase their rent, because if they don't increase it, they can't make up for it later. So for instance, I have a great tenant next door. He's been with me for 2 years. 0 rent increases. Why? Because I want to keep him. I'm competing for him. As I've mentioned earlier, he has lots of options, other places he could go, but he pays on time, he improves the property, he's quiet, he never breaks anything, he's a really friendly guy and I enjoy chatting with him. I want him to stay here in my property as my neighbor and as my tenant. And so instead of increasing his rent, I don't increase it because I want him to be stuck with me, because I gave him such a good deal he can't afford to go anywhere else because he's saving so much money here. I'm competing for his business. That's a good thing. If you enacted rent controls that say I'm only allowed to raise it 3% a year, and if when he moves out, I'm not allowed to catch it back up to where it should be, I have no choice but to raise it that same amount every single year, because when he moves out, I don't get to catch it up to where I didn't raise it a couple of years. I only get to move it that 3%. At some point, if I'm not increasing it, then I'm going to fall behind. Do you think that the government isn't going to increase their property taxes? You'd be dead wrong if that's what you think. The reason that a lot of landlords have to increase rents is because the government increases the property tax. When I bought my duplex, my monthly payment was $27.50. The very next year, when my property taxes were assessed, which they're assessed every other year, my monthly payment went up $200 a month. $200 a month. That's $2,400 in a year. Just in property tax increase because the value of my property went up. If I'm making a slim profit of a couple $100s a month, I can have the entire profit wiped out completely by the government raising my property taxes, and now I make no profit. And then 2 years later, if rent control is enacted and I can't raise it to the equivalent amount of what my property taxes is going up by, 2 years later when it gets raised again, I can't possibly catch up to get it rented at a high enough rate so that I can actually make a profit anymore, and I am forced to sell, because who's going to operate a business at a loss? So instead, I won't renew the lease with the tenant. After they move out, I will renovate the property and make it look beautiful, and then I will sell it and be done with it. I'll either turn it into condos and sell it as 2 separate condos, or I'll sell it to somebody else who thinks they can make a profit off of it. And what will end up happening is it will reduce the number of available rentals out there for people who can't afford to buy and are looking to rent. And basic supply and demand, when the number of rentals goes down, but the demand stays constant, the price goes up. Rent control fails. It's very easy to show why, it's very easy to explain why, and it's a dumb idea to try to incorporate because it doesn't work. And by work, I mean it doesn't actually provide more houses at an affordable price for people. You get less houses, things are more expensive, and you end up getting trapped somewhere as a business owner, losing money. And that's why you have people in New York burning down their own properties so that they can try to get the insurance money, because they lost money on it for 10, 15 years and they can't get rid of it. No one will buy it for them. They're obligated to fix it still, and it's bleeding them dry. They're making nothing. And you may sit there and say, well, good, they don't deserve it. They're a rich fat cat landlord. Well, sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. And that's why they burn it down and try to take the insurance money, because they're just looking for a way out. Once again, I'm for freedom and choice. If you don't get much freedom or choice when you can't even get rid of something you don't want anymore.
At one point, he refutes my claim that a landlord has power over you because they can kick you out onto the street by saying, no, we can't. We have to get the sheriff to do it.
Okay, the video's already running long, but I wanted to comment on at least one more thing. So when Matt says, well, we can't kick you out, we have to get the sheriff to do it. Well, yes, and he didn't elaborate, I'm sure, for the sake of time, so I'll do it here because whatever, this video is too long as is. Yes, I can't kick you out, the sheriff has to, but I can't just go to the sheriff and be like, all right, sheriff, go ahead and kick you out. No, it has to go through the justice system. You actually have to prove that the tenant hasn't met their obligations, and that you've given them the proper notice, and that you've gone through the proper steps to give them time to make their end of the bargain right. And then when you go to court, the attorney or whoever it is, or excuse me, the judge makes a decision as to whether or not I, the landlord, have met all my obligations, and has the tenant not met their obligations. And if so, in the proper amounts of time has passed in a civil court, the judge will then say, okay, the sheriff has authorized to go and evict this person out of your unit. You have fulfilled your end of the obligation. I don't get to just hire the sheriff and be like, hey man, here's $50, kick this guy out of my house for you. That's not how it works. It actually has to go through a process where you get the opportunity to defend yourself in court.
He tells me anybody who claims the state works on behalf of the landlord doesn't know what they're talking about. And this is the sum total of his argument, because he can't provide any examples.
Okay, I'll provide an example for you. Yes, the state does not work on behalf of the landlord, okay? First of all, the state is supposed to be neutral. They are supposed to be neutral because what a contract between a tenant and a landlord, or a tenant and a corporation that's running housing, it's supposed to be a civil. This is a non-criminal trial. It's a civil matter that the state will mediate between with a judge. So they're supposed to remain neutral. I don't think they remain neutral. I think they err on the side of the tenant almost exclusively, just about anywhere you go. The landlord, the onus is on him to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person is actually in violation of their contract, and it's on the landlord to provide the documentation and show the emails and show the letters and show that they served the papers and do all of this stuff to get the person out. The tenant is sitting in there not paying for any rent, presumably, and the landlord is the one having to file all the paperwork and pay for the eviction and go through the process and meet with the sheriff and get them out to the property and let them into the property. That's on you. Now, are there certain states that have extremely tenant favorable laws? Yes, let me give you an example. Washington State, where I live, for instance, just enacted the nation's first right to counsel bill, which I did a video on, and I'll put the link in the description below. In a criminal trial, the state is required to provide you with an attorney to defend yourself because the state is coming after you in a legal matter, accusing you of a crime. You have an opportunity to defend yourself, and if you can't afford it, the state will provide an attorney for you. In a civil matter between two private entities or private parties, the state has never before said, well, we're going to choose to make sure that an attorney represents the tenant until just now. Now, you as the landlord who used to be able to go in there and go before a judge with your paperwork and show them what you had, now in Washington, the tenant is going to have a professional with them to go ahead and navigate that process for them, which means that you as the landlord probably are going to need to hire your own attorney to make sure that you don't get taken advantage of. Why? Well, I can tell you right now that for the justice system, for all the good things about it, there's many things that are also difficult. Usually the attorney's job is not to sit there and figure out how to prove that you're innocent. It's to sit there and try to delay and defer and continue. Having a professional represent the tenant is going to do nothing but elongate the actual problem itself and take the time that you're not collecting rent, not able to rent out your property, and expand it. That's one example of where the laws favor the tenants. You want another one? The eviction moratorium. In some states, it's still going on, like here in Washington. Since March of 2020 to June of 2021, there has been no evictions. You can't get an eviction. That's 15 months, 16 months. No, 15 months in a row where you couldn't evict somebody. Yeah, that benefits the tenants big time. Now, you may be sitting here thinking that all tenants are great, wonderful people who, of course, would pay if that's what they can do. But I got news for you. There's some people out there who said, I can't be evicted even if I don't pay. Sweet. I ain't paying. I'm not doing it. I'm taking as many free months of rent as I possibly can. Yeah, there's people out there that do crappy things like that, even when they can afford it. And it says a lot about their character. It shows that they're kind of a crappy person. They shouldn't be doing that. There's a great example of how a law was passed. The CDC unilaterally decided that it had the authority to step in and null and void and invalidate a contract signed willingly and lawfully between two private citizens and benefit one of them against the other to subsidize the tenant at the expense of the landlord. Not the government stepping in and saying, you can't make your rent payments, we will make your rent payments for you. Or we will provide you with some sort of voucher so that you can make your payments. No. The government stepped in and said the landlord has to eat the cost. We, the government, aren't going to pay it. No, we're not going to pay for it. You, the tenant, get to live for free, and your landlord has to eat the cost. And there's nothing they can do about it. Sure, maybe they can file for some back rent at a later point. But as a landlord, if you know anything about evictions, when you get a judgment that says they owe you back rent, go ahead and Google what the percentage of those people who actually ever see a dime of that money is. It's next to zero.
I think that you're actually going to put some of your audience in a more vulnerable state if they choose to rent strike, because that is going to give the landlord a valid reason to try and process an eviction.
And that's strange to me because he spent an hour claiming that the landlord-tenant relationship is mutually beneficial, that the courts are stacked in favor of the tenants, and landlords have negligible rights, that all of this is strictly voluntary, that we shouldn't stoke tensions and division. And then he says that I'm making people more vulnerable. Not vulnerable, but more vulnerable. An admission that they were vulnerable before I advocated anything, that they were already being victimized, and any attempt to fight back will inevitably backfire and make their vulnerabilities even worse. And all of that raises the question, vulnerable to whom?
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. Last thing I'm going to respond to, because I'm really running out of time here. He talks about if you join rent strikes, you're going to end up more vulnerable to the tenant. And then ThoughtSlime goes, oh, so you're admitting that's some type of threat. What are you going to do? Why? Who are they vulnerable to? They're vulnerable to their own poor choices. Matt Mckeever, the landlord, was saying that he really doesn't think that you're going to get the nationwide compliance with a nationwide rent strike. Okay, you're not going to get 99% of the people to come out and say we're not paying. If you did, then potentially there wouldn't be any negative ramifications because there would be such wide support for your cause that the 1% wouldn't be able to do anything with any success to have ramifications against 99. But instead, the reason he made his statement was, look, if you get a couple hundred people out of a city of 100,000 to have a rent strike, all that's going to happen is those couple hundred people are going to create a bad name for themselves. They're going to end up on websites with their names and information posted as bad tenants, and it's going to be harder for them to rent somewhere else. It's gonna go on their credit, which is gonna make it more difficult for them to ever buy a house if they wanted to buy one or get any type of financial assistance. It's gonna be harder for them to get a property because some landlord's gonna be like, hey, can I call your last owner and see what kind of tenant you were like? Oh no, you can't. I went on a rent strike. Well, shoot, I'm not renting to you. You don't pay your rent. Yes, he was saying that if you do that, you're gonna make yourself more vulnerable to poor situations like not being able to get good housing and not being able to qualify for a loan, not being able to borrow money because you made dumb choices as a political stunt to try to save 1 or 2 months rent. As I said in my last video, if you truly can't make ends meet, there are options for you. Try to get out of your contract early. Talk to your landlord, see if they will help you. A large majority of people will. Not all, because there are some deadbeats out there. Or there's just some people who just, you know what, you can't afford it. You need to either move out or you need to pay. This is what we signed in a contract, move out or pay. And if you can't afford to it, move out. Move back in with family, get a roommate, move back in with friends. If you have lost your job because of the coronavirus, there's safety nets in place like we talked about earlier. There's unemployment benefits in place. A lot of people are actually making more money on unemployment than they made when they were actually employed. So I'm not going to buy the whole, oh, I'm on downtimes and there's no option for me. I have to go straight from my house, straight to the streets. As I mentioned in my last video, a huge majority of street homeless people, the ones that you actually see walking around on the streets, are not homeless because they couldn't afford to make their rent payment. They are homeless because of a combination of mental health issues, criminal accusations and charges, and drug addiction. And some myriad combination of those three things has caused them to go into a downward spiral of their life. They are in need of treatment and medical care, not a free house. Look, guys, I hope you liked the video. I know it was a long one. The response was just ridiculous, but I wanted to get as many things said as I possibly could. This was asked for in the comments and by other people out there, so I wanted to do my best to actually respond. I know I missed a whole bunch of things he said, but in order to not turn his 40-minute response into a 3-hour video, I tried to keep it short and concise. Leave a comment down below. Anybody who subscribes, you're part of the before I hit 5,000 subscriber group. I appreciate you a lot. I genuinely like the thoughtslime. I think he's a funny guy. I watch almost all of his videos. I think he's creative. I think he's funny. I disagree with him vehemently on almost everything he talks about, but I think it's important to listen to people you disagree with because they may actually have a good point about something. And there's also things we do agree on all the time. So, I would like the political discourse in our country or in our planet to be a little bit more reasonable and a little less hostile. And you'll never hear me telling him that he's an idiot, murderer, garbage human being like he referred to landlords in the last video or like he refers to cops in all of his videos. I think that he and I would get along perfectly fine if we hung out, even if we disagree politically. I encourage political debate. Tear me up in the comments, and we'll catch you next time.